Superman is probably the most iconic of all superheroes. He's the one superheroes are named for.
He's the Nietzschean fantasy ideal all wrapped up in a red cape. The Superman.
He's bigger than life. He's just our modern myth.
I always felt I was different, even before you and Pa told me I was adopted, but how is it possible I could do these things?
Most people, even people who've never read a comic book in their life, they know the basic story of Superman. They know that he came from Krypton and he's got special powers because he's here on Earth. So on one hand, that stuff's a no-brainer, but at the same time, because it's so familiar, you don't want it to feel stale. So you do kind of want to put your own spin on it a little bit.
Originally, Bruce wanted it to be 40s. He wanted it to be a period piece.
We did toy with the idea of doing a very retro-style Superman show. I actually did a whole bunch of character designs that were very, very 40s looking. I mean, even more so than what we had done with Batman.
That would have made the show feel almost as though it was an extension of the Fleischer cartoons.
So I abandoned that approach, and I think for the better.
Bruce realized, no, the show has to stand on its own. So instead of having it placed in the past, let's place it in a sort of pseudo-future past.
Just what is your problem with Superman?
Everything's just so darn easy for him.
There was a joke at DC Comics, which was, how do you write stories about a character who can destroy the universe by listening real hard?
Did you hear that? If you go by the comics, he can push a planet out of orbit. And, you know, if you go to that level, there's no story you can tell. The show's going to be over in 5 minutes.
Our Superman, in order to be believable, had to have limitations.
Nice one, Clark.
And if he struggles, then the audience kind of struggles with him. There's some drama there, because if everything is easy, well, what's the threat?
We pared his powers down so that our Superman could be probably killed without green kryptonite, with just a massive force of some sort.
We did Superman a few years after Batman, and in that time, we felt we had learned a lot of things about doing an half-hour-long adventure show.
It wouldn't be bad if people knew a little more about Superman. I don't want anyone thinking you're like that nut in Gotham City.
I think Bruce's thinking when he got the chance to do Superman, he decided to streamline the process, which would give him more control over how the finished animation would look. So you find that the lines are a lot simpler, there's a lot less folds on clothing. The characters are actually more cartoony than they were even in the Batman animated series.
It had a much brighter palette than Batman, and that was by design. We wanted to show that Superman's world is a bit more visually exciting, visually more optimistic than Batman's world.
Superman's kind of the flip side of Batman, so that necessitated the backgrounds being bright and colorful. The stories generally took place in the daytime.
We decided to modernize the characters a little bit more than what we had done on Batman. So even though we stuck to a classic Art Deco basis for the architecture, it's a much more optimistic version of Art Deco. It's not the angry, edgy, sharp-edged, ziggurat style that we had done on Batman.
The idea behind Metropolis was that the buildings were just coming out of the ground and going straight to the sky. All the streets were like elevated highways and things. So you had the scale of where Superman can fly around, and it feels like even though he's flying around, he still has this huge city to cover.
We so wanted to flex different muscles than we had on Batman. Batman, everything was, even though it had a lot of really, good high-adventure action scenes and stuff, it was still very much grounded in reality. Whereas Superman, you've got this alien from another world who leaps tall buildings in a single bound and does all this other stuff. It's kind of like, automatically you're playing with a whole different set of rules. So what better way to establish the difference between Batman and Superman than by starting the show literally on another planet?
When I first got hired, designing the people on Krypton was the first assignment I had to do. And it was really like, oh my God. Because, if you just start on Superman, well, you know what Superman looks like, you know what Clark Kent looks like, you know what Lois looks like. That's easy, but Krypton is usually the most 15 minutes in any story about Superman, and it's over. And then, of course, the first thing I was told was, don't make it like anything that's been done on Krypton. So I'm like, oh geez, how do I do this?
It's so hard to find something unique because everything's basically been done. But the thing that we really wanted to avoid was making it look Earth-like at all. We really wanted to make it seem like an alien culture, everything from the clothes they wear to the architecture. Rather than going with the usual cliche of miles-high skyscrapers, we thought, okay, well, Kryptonians are so advanced that they've somehow managed to combine their technology and build their city in harmony with nature. So we started looking at organic shapes. So we started looking at shapes from nature, you know, flowers and plant shapes. So that's why all the buildings are somewhat asymmetrical.
Oh, Jor-El. Such a beautiful world, even up here. It's hard to believe it could all come to an end.
Bruce made it a home. He made Superman's parents these really loving, caring parents. And if you watch that first episode, they're touching a lot and they're kissing a lot. And they're two people who are really in love. So when their planet is destroyed, you really feel bad for them. You really feel bad about how difficult it is for them to give up their son.
Once he gets to Earth, he'll be safe.
I think it turned out really well, and it was really interesting to come up with the different motifs.
Good afternoon, Jor-El.
Brainiac, what an unpleasant surprise.
I did have one good idea. I did have my one good idea was, I said, you know, Bruce, it'd be interesting if Brainiac came from Krypton.
Should I not be saved above all?
You self-righteous monster.
Temper, Jor-El.
I was a little bit resistant to it at first because part of it just me being a diehard geek and being a traditionalist and thinking, well, Brainiac doesn't come from Krypton. Nobody ever did that before. That's just wrong, And but somehow he was able to talk me into it, and ultimately I think it's a really great idea. I think it really works really well tying Brainiac into Superman's Kryptonian heritage. It's almost generational. I mean, he was Jor-El's enemy, as much as he is Kal-El's enemy. And so I think that's kind of a neat thing.
You are your father's son, Kal-El. Headstrong, foolish, easily defeated, and ultimately forgotten.
Oh well, an alien in my own backyard.
Lex is basically the architect of the city. He literally built Metropolis in our reality of the show.
I own Metropolis. My technology built it, my will keeps it going, and nearly 2/3 of its people work for me whether they know it or not.
He considers it his city. Which, of course, when Superman shows up, then it's, it's like, wow, hey, everybody loves him more than they love me. Well, that's, this guy's got to go.
You will never control me, Luthor. Never.
Well, then, I guess I'll have to kill you.
It was kind of fun and fresh at the time to portray a businessman as evil. He's not that evil. He just wants to call all of the shots.
The stories in Superman had to be larger than life against larger than life menaces. Whereas a madman like the Joker or Mad Hatter could easily propel a story for Batman, those guys would be easily dispensed with Superman. The powers got greater with Superman, so the threats had to get greater.
Hey! Hands off my hog!
The fact that Superman stories are grander, broader, it allowed us the freedom to do things that we couldn't really do on our first take on Batman. There was always an edict on the old show to make it believable and make it real. So there was no magic. And with Superman, it's like all bets are off. You have a character that can do it so much, and a world that's so broad and so big. And we have the opportunity to have more fun with them.
At one point, Bruce asked me, if you had a chance to go back to Batman or continue on Superman, what would you do? And I said I'd go with Superman. I was enjoying it. I was having a good time.
I'm proud of the show because of how good we tried to make everything.
We really reached the height of what Superman can be. Superman, his supporting characters and supporting cast are kind of what makes him Superman. That creates the whole world of Superman, and you really can't have Superman without those characters being around to work off of him.
When we started doing the show, you realize that, not every story can be told with one guy.
Coming through!
Something going on I should know about?
Where have you been, Kent? On another planet?
Lois has traditionally in the comics been demeaning Clark for being very mild-mannered and timid, and yet she's always out pursuing Superman, either to find out his identity or else get him interested in her.
Nice S.
And that said, we didn't really want to do that version of Lois, even though that version does have a lot of charm of its own. So Lois had to become more of an equal for Clark.
The thinking behind their dynamic was to go back to the very first representation of Lois and Clark, which was they were competitors. They weren't necessarily buddy-buddy.
You want to keep up with me, you gotta be quick. I'm no tour guide and I don't hold hands.
They were really more competitors than even friends. Lois viewed Clark as a rival. She didn't think much of him, but she did respect him as a reporter.
Lois is still basically the go-get-'em, girl reporter. She's just instantly, appealing, but at the same time, she's not really somebody you want to mess with.
Big train wreck, 5 miles north. Someone was standing on the tracks, and right now I wish it was the guy who built the stupid elevator!
She's kind of bossy and kind of doesn't really give him the time of day. I think that's kind of a challenge to him.
If you got a minute, I'd like to show you my pictures.
Originally, the first design for Jimmy was the classic redhead guy with the bow tie and really goofy looking. He needed to be more hip.
Jimmy Olsen is an interesting character. He's a lot of fun. He is the youthful identification. It was tough to kind of figure out a way to make him fresh, to make him feel hip, and yet still kind of that nerdy little kid that's following Lois and Clark around.
We wanted to make him less of the, gee, Mr. Kent type nerdy photographer. We made him very much a kid of contemporary times, someone who's not above stretching the truth a bit in order to, sneak in someplace, take some photographs, take some risks in order to get what he wanted.
He was just a little bit cooler, but it's Jimmy Olsen. How cool can you make Jimmy Olsen?
It's a very traditional take on Jimmy. He looks a little bit more modern. He's got the the funky mullet and the baggy pants, but other than that, he's Jimmy Olsen. It's like you don't really have to reinvent those characters really from the ground up, because they're archetypes that have been around for 60 some odd years, and there's a good reason they've been around for 60 some odd years. They're good archetypes. They work.
Superman.
Hey, I like it. Superman. It's catchy, sticks with you, the kind of name that looks great splashed across 3 columns. Make it 4.
Barry White, Clark Kent's boss, good guy. We always got the idea he was like a great ex-reporter and someone, a champion of the little guy, someone who had not sold out to the big media moguls, and despite the temptations of the modern world was still going to put out the last honest paper in Metropolis.
Perry's sort of a gruff guy. Sort of no-nonsense guy, but he had sort of a father figure to everybody, bring everybody together.
He does yell at everybody, but he doesn't come off as a tyrant. There's still some caring in him.
We're gonna have to do it your way, Dan.
All right. Okay, move in.
Turpin and Maggie Sawyer were some characters introduced originally in the comic books and gradually became integrated into the Superman mythology. Superman doesn't really need cops around, but these two were kind of a nice mix. We had the cool, collected female officer who really knew her way around a gun and how to handle, advanced firepower, and Turpin, who you got the idea was like a cop from the streets who had worked himself up into the Special Crimes Unit.
You could have been in terrible danger.
That's why they call me Terrible Turpin.
He's a gruff cop who doesn't really think that Superman is necessary, that people can take care of themselves.
I want to bring Superman in on this officially.
You're kidding.
But when, the chips are down and Superman's in trouble, he saves him.
Dan Turpin was based on Jack Kirby and even was designed to sort of resemble him.
Bruce just wanted to turn him into Kirby, and we're all big Kirby fans, so, that was our homage to Jack.
Maggie Sawyer, tough, cool character, fun dealing with her, and again, sort of a nice contrast to what was going off.
She's the sort of opposite end of the spectrum to Turpin. She actually admires Superman to some degree, and she's a tough cop.
Get ready. Now!
Hamilton served a purpose early on as someone Superman could talk to about science in Metropolis. We always imagined that Metropolis was years ahead of every place else as far as technological breakthroughs, and we needed to give that a face. So Emil Hamilton served that role very well. He was somebody who, through his job at Star Labs, was coming up with more benevolent solutions toward making life better. So he became a confidant and a friend of Superman's as far as, someone Superman could go to help work up a new suit if Superman had to go into space or extreme conditions, or he needed some shielding against kryptonite.
Superman, if you can alter the trajectory by 5 degrees.
Dr. Hamilton is a scientist that also helps Superman learn about his past. So the Star Labs represent that science aspect that he doesn't have on his own.
And because the show does have a real strong science fictional base to it, you really do need a character who can be Mr. Wizard, who can explain the science of it all.
Let me guess. Martha sewed it for you.
What?
By the way, Clark, how are the folks?
Lana Lang was a lot of fun in that we had taken her out of small town Smallville and turned her into a very cosmopolitan young woman. We gave her this skill in fashion design, and she actually left the farm and gone out and made something of herself. And also someone who, remembered Clark from the old days and remembered the fact that he liked root beer floats and things like that. There's something very comfortable in seeing the girl next door again.
I like powerful men.
Lana, this is no joke.
Obviously, if you pay attention to the pilot, she clearly has to know who he is. She's seen him do things that no person can do.
Lana likes Clark. She doesn't really care about Superman, and the fact that Clark is Superman doesn't faze her one bit. She knew him from the beginning, so she knows what kind of guy he is, what kind of morals he has. So she really likes him, and she likes him no matter what.
Lana is almost like Clark's surrogate sister. She's kind of the sister he never had, and so then ultimately when they hit the teenage years and the hormones started kicking in, probably he was looking at Lana and she was looking at him in a slightly different way. But at the same time, I think there's almost a more brotherly and sisterly bond between them rather than anything really romantic.
It doesn't matter where you were born or what you can do, you'll always be Clark Kent. Superman just helps out now and then.
The decision to keep Ma and Pa Kent alive in contemporary times in the comic books came from the John Byrne series. And I think he realized that they were an asset to the Superman mythos, and it allowed us to have Smallville in the back of our minds to return to.
We kind of used Ma and Pa Kent as a sounding board for Clark because they're the only two people he can talk to about the problems he has as Superman, or trying to juggle his Clark Kent life and his Superman life.
They brought out a very human part of him, and you need that with Superman.
They are such an important part of the Superman mythos just because even though he came from two really wonderful Kryptonian parents, they basically died when he was still an infant, so they really didn't have a chance to mold him as a human being.
Superman was lucky enough to land on Earth and be adopted by these people who are still alive, and he basically is the optimistic side of being a superhero. So he has a family that he can go to and bounce things off.
Thank God for the Kents. Thank God he was raised by two God-fearing, wonderful people in the heartland of America who instilled in him a real strong sense of right and wrong from an early age. So, they're as much responsible for Superman as Jor-El and Lara are. Jor-El and Lara, they gave him his genes, but, Jonathan and Martha, gave him his morality.
Get your tail in here. Perry's got an assignment for us.
He's only as good a hero as he is surrounded by other terrific supporting characters.
Like I said, Superman is all about his supporting characters. They help make him relatable. To these two people, he's their son. To Lois Lane, well, when he's Superman, he's somebody she secretly loves, and when he's Clark Kent, he's a rival. All these supporting characters serve to kind of show you a different side of Superman and make him more human.
Think I'd jeopardize the welfare of the planet just to settle my personal grudge with Superman?
We'd just come off of doing the Batman animated series and we did Superman, and the first thing we looked at was the villains and immediately realized that we were going to have to pump them up a little bit. We went back and did some research. Obviously the main villains that everybody knows, Luthor and Brainiac, basically pretty easy to adapt to our show, but then once you get past Luthor and Brainiac, the next level of villains are characters like Parasite and Metallo, and they've got decent visuals, so that gave us something to play off of and interesting powers. But then once you get past them, suddenly you're into the realm of 50-year-old guys, a little bit overweight, wearing business suits. So we had to put our thinking caps on and come up with ways of making them visual and dramatically interesting.
You look at Superman and you say, okay, what could give him trouble? Concentrated light, that can give him trouble. A really great big charge of electricity could give him trouble. Might not kill him, but it'll knock him through a few walls.
The rush, the power. His most effective villains are those people who find out what it's like to have an element of power, and not only do they misuse it, but they also make innocent people suffer for it. And that puts them directly in opposition with Superman, and when they go up against him, they will lose.
Hey, what now? Coming up with the things that resonate for longtime fans, but also appeal to a newer fan who doesn't know about that history.
Come, let's look you over.
You can't just fight him with brute force. It's more interesting if you can fight him with intellect. And the smartest guy in probably all of comics is Lex Luthor. And he makes the best villain for Superman.
I would call that an understatement.
Luthor, for many, many years, he was just the mad scientist, and then he was like the renegade mad scientist in the supervillain suit, and then we kind of amped that up to the point where we actually said that he basically owns most of Metropolis.
He wanted people to know that Lex Luthor created Metropolis. After all, why would you build a giant skyscraper in the shape of a big L in the middle of town? You know, you want to sign your work.
He's basically the king of Metropolis, and then suddenly Superman shows up. You know, this town ain't big enough for the two of us, you know. One of us has got to go, and it's going to be you.
I think I have something to say about this.
A lot of the appeal of the character, I have to give credit to Clancy Brown, who plays his voice.
Quiet, please. The missiles will never make it here.
He'd originally had auditioned for Superman, but when he came in, he was just perfect as Lex. He was incredible.
I prefer to investigate this matter firsthand and alone.
He had this amazingly smooth, suave bit of class to him, so he was like half brute and half classy guy. It was a really good combination and just played it to the hilt.
That's coming out of your pay.
So we meet again, Lex Luthor.
Brainiac.
We got the story outline for the first episode where suddenly Brainiac's on Krypton. Well, in the comics, he didn't come from Krypton. I was initially reluctant to do it just because I'm very much of a purist, and I said, well, everybody knows Brainiac doesn't come from Krypton, and then I stopped and said, well, no, nobody knows that.
The idea that he might have been an AI presence on Krypton, that he was partly responsible for everybody not listening to Jor-El, so that he could take time to save himself from what was going to happen, was really appealing. And I really pushed for that because I thought, well, this is a way of really giving the series a different spin right off the bat.
This is a really omnipotent being. This character has the ability to go out and absorb intelligences from all over the universe and then destroy them, and then he's got all of their information. He doesn't feel guilt, he doesn't feel anything, and that could become very dry. That could become a very boring performance if it's not handled in a very delicate way. And so we had to think physically how to depict it and vocally how to depict it that kept it interesting.
I calculated we would meet again, Kal-El. So I designed some improvements.
It did give Superman somebody with a bit of a history to hate. Yeah, he's clearly right up there next to Luthor in terms of arch eneminess.
Who am me? Where am home?
Bizarro goes way back in the comics, at least to the 50s, and every series has to have the evil twin episode, right? You know, so, you know, what better way to go than, you know, a guy who's wearing Superman's outfit.
You don't look so good. Leave me alone!
He could do anything Superman could do without any of the judgment behind it. Bizarro doesn't necessarily know he's doing something wrong when he does it. He's just literally thinking the first thought that comes to his head.
You know, stop missile. Krypton need missile.
First started off as a pretty decent clone of Superman where he was good looking and smart and strong. Then, of course, started to lose his intelligence and his good looks and, you know, became this pathetic wretch.
We are not scrapping the project for one glitch.
Luthor created him and he's not perfect. And yet, does a guy deserve to live? You know, Bizarro certainly thinks so. But Luthor just looks upon him as a failed experiment.
What am me?
Bizarro, that's what you am.
Because Bizarro is a character that looks like Superman, we thought Let's let the guy voicing Superman, Tim Daly, do the voice of Bizarro.
Superman! Me am happy to see you.
Likewise.
Bizarro let Tim Daly just go nuts. Gave him a chance to just let loose and be weird and energize things that he would never be able to do as Superman.
Me am Superman.
Sorry, my friend, but you am toast.
Metallo in the flesh.
Metallo is powered by kryptonite. So while he is a very strong robot who can cause a lot of damage on his own, the fact that he's got the kryptonite radiation weakening Superman when we're flying the ointment, if you will.
The big problem with Metallo is he's too powerful. All he's got to do is open up his chest and, okay, show's over, Superman, you're dead. We had to like really bend over backwards trying to come up with ways of keeping Superman in the game, so it wasn't just, okay, I give up, Metallo's here, I'm running away.
Nice spacesuit. When I'm done with you, you'll wish you were on the moon.
Gave him the anti-kryptonite suit, which is the big lead suit. As long as Superman knew Metallo was coming, he'd have a chance to go to Star Labs and get the anti-kryptonite suit, which of course would always get destroyed in the course of the episode, and then you're right back at square one. Malcolm McDowell really nailed his personality.
My new friends from Intergang found me right where you left me. Dug me out and fixed me up as good as new.
There's this superiority attitude that Metallo has that I thought he embodied really nicely.
Bet you think you've got me. Well, surprise!
Mr. Mixel-Plick?
No one had used that version of him in so long, it seemed fresh and new to just go back and redesign that a little bit and tweak it, but basically it's the exact same design as was used in the comics from the 40s.
Superman! You, my friend, are the ultimate challenge. We're gonna have many merry games, you and I.
In a weird way, Mixie almost kind of thinks of himself as Superman's pal. Without me around, life would get pretty boring, and I don't really want to kill the big lug, but I do kind of like tugging on the cape every once in a while.
Mxyzptlk is all-powerful, really. I mean, he's one of the most powerful beings in the entire DC universe.
Superman always outthinks him. He can always trick him back, and that drives him nuts.
How does he do it?
Personality-wise, he's very much the way he is in the comics. He's just that annoying little imp from the fifth dimension that, you just want to strangle.
For centuries now, I've been pitting my interdimensional magic against schmoes who thought they could go 15 rounds with the old master.
It was a real stroke of luck getting Gilbert Gottfried to play him. That was a big plus.
Kill Tipsy's him! Gosh, you're thick! Now for the last time!
Other characters, looking at what they did in the comics, sometimes we just did not have a good visual. I mean, Toyman was the most extreme example. Toyman didn't give us anything from the comics except for the fact that he used toys as weapons, which is a really good gimmick.
To me, the redesign of Toyman was the most fun. Basically, the idea came from this old ventriloquist doll that they used to sell in catalogs, and I guess a lot of people on the crew either remembered that or like me, actually owned one.
That was like a really great way to go with him. It was kind of eerie and creepy look, and this whole childlike persona, which was almost more like a Batman villain than a Superman villain. But that was all fine because he did have the big, insane robotic toys that he could punch Superman around with, so that was all good.
He's probably one of the most disturbing redesigns, I think, of all of the Superman villains. He's just not connected to what was already established in the comic books at all. He's a totally new interpretation of that character.
Parasite is not much different than he is in the comics. He's basically this guy who's got the ability to drain Superman's powers. There you go.
When he touches you, he also gets your thoughts. So he knows who you are and what your secrets are.
Don't be afraid. I know how to control my power.
That's what they all say.
Parasite is kind of like the wish fulfillment villain. He's like the guy who's powerless, and yet he's envious of somebody else, so he'll take whatever he can get from somebody else. And the fact is that he can rob Superman of his powers and his memories, so he becomes a bigger threat. He can defeat him physically, and at the same time, Superman's mind is an open book to him, because there goes the secret identity. And the more power he gets, the more drunk on the power he gets, and the more he can't handle it. So he's a villain who can often be defeated through his own greed.
The few instances where we did create villains from scratch that didn't exist in the comics. We certainly wanted to create villains that were more visual and had more powers than the run-of-the-mill Superman villains like Livewire and Luminous. They're a little bit more science fictional in nature, and they have extra powers, so they can conceivably be a genuine threat to Superman.
Looking for me, Livewire?
Well timed, Super Jerk. Let's rock!
We wanted to create a very strong female villain. The fact that we had a female shock jock who was out there throwing bricks at Superman made her interesting. Here was a character you can't totally dislike.
Uh-oh, do not use a plastic seal is broken.
Of course, once you became Livewire, it was just all about just being evil and just hating Superman and just wanting to kill him, which is fine. That's a perfectly good motivation for a villain.
Suddenly, she's in a position to emphasize everything she said about Superman. She can go after him in a big way.
Let's get to the heart of the matter.
I've always loved Lori Petty's voice. I thought she was able to make that character cute as well as bizarre, because the character's been infused with hundreds of thousands of volts of electricity. That's got to screw with your head a little bit.
Maybe this is the real me. But then again, maybe it's me. Or me.
Luminous wasn't even Luminous at first.
You know, don't you?
He was just this guy that Lois had spurned and was using nefarious ways of taking her out. And again, that was a very low-key kind of story. It was more of a murder-to-be mystery. But then when we brought him back, we upped him to supervillain scale and gave him his light and hologram powers, and definitely much more of a physical threat to Superman at that point.
See you soon, even if you don't see me.
I don't really know exactly how we figured out how to keep the suspense going and still keep credible threats without everybody having kryptonite bullets, but somehow we managed it.
I see you're a man of your word.
I am many things, Kal-El. You couldn't begin to imagine half of them. But for now, I shall take the role of executioner.
Superman is always difficult to write because he is the all-powerful superhero.
If you don't power him down, he can fight anything.
He's so powerful that it's hard to find somebody who can match him.
You know, when you've got a guy who can fly and move planets, you've got to come up with a bigger threat.
A lot of the classic Superman villains were like, middle-aged guys in suits.
He's one of these characters that usually tries to save other people's lives but doesn't fear for his own. So you don't often get the sense that Superman is fighting for his life.
He's super strong, he's super fast. It's impossible to really come up with a credible threat for him.
So you really have to ratchet up the threat level. You've got to do something cosmic.
Darkseid's valuable because he is physically the equal of Superman.
Darkseid is one merciless, evil dude. And so when he showed up, you knew this was serious business.
When I was a kid, I was kind of ignorant of, comic book history, and Jack Kirby to me represented, he's the Marvel guy. He draws all those kind of blocky characters.
Every time I'd get a Jack Kirby comic, I'd go, it's kind of cool, but it's really weird. It's like the drawing is really weird. I know anatomy doesn't look like that. I know people don't have square jaws and, weird mouths and big spacey eyes.
With Kirby, it was all about trying to capture in a static medium the sense that things were moving and colliding and crashing into each other. There's a lot of violence and tension and crackle in the way that he would handle things.
He's not drawing things, big and blocky just to fill up a panel. He's doing it with a sense of purpose because he wants your eye to go right for the dynamics of the scene.
I look upon him as the most influential artist of my generation, and the generation before it. I put him up there with, like, Andy Warhol as somebody who changed the culture.
When you see Kirby stuff, as a child, you might be worried that this guy was trying to scare you.
They had more personality. There was more of a soap opera going on, more of character going on. They had great origins.
He was really great with huge, expansive ideas. The whole idea of sort of the cosmic story is Kirby's strong point.
He created this tremendous mythology, which had to do with two planets. One was good, one was evil. And in order to stop wars from happening between them, they exchanged sons. It was just a tremendous start for a whole host of comic book characters.
And he saw firsthand when he was growing up what sort of unbridled capitalism could do to ordinary people and how hard it made their lives. And then he went off to war and he fought in Europe. And he saw what the Nazis and what fascism did to people's ordinary lives. And so he had a very sort of gut feeling of what this kind of evil was. And he was able to embody this and coalesce it into a character like Darkseid.
Using the idea of Darkseid as a dictator is a really good idea because he represents fascism, whereas Superman represents the will of the individual. So he's a great character, and he's a great match for somebody like Superman, because in Darkseid you can see sort of what Superman might become if he did not have the restraints and did not have the morality.
Kirby's creation of the fourth world really changed the dynamic at the DC universe.
It has parallels to heaven and hell. You've got Apocalypse, which is clearly hell, and then you've got New Genesis, which is clearly heaven. So it has almost like a biblical slant to it. And Darkseid is the ultimate evil. He's the ultimate tempter, the ultimate devil, if you will.
Bringing in a character of the scope and the power of Darkseid really sort of raises the ante for Superman and all of the heroes in the DC universe. They suddenly have something much larger that they need to contend with.
You have Orion, who's fathered by both worlds, basically. He's good and he's evil.
With the fourth world, there were so many elements and ideas and characters connected to it.
You had Darkseid with his relationship with the other planet. We had the estranged son. He had the adopted son, Mr. Miracle, who ran away from him. He was part of a large family.
He would have these ideas that would just sort of burst off the page. As the people who followed came along, they would look at it and go, wow, that's a great idea. I could do something with this. And so it was sort of like planting seeds.
Darkseid was also a new kind of villain because he marshaled all these other forces. And he marshaled all these other characters. And so you could wrap a whole series or several comic book series, as it turned out, around your unresolved conflict with that character, because he wasn't just a character. He represented a planet, an army, a constellation of forces.
With the fourth world, it started to turn into something, and he just never got to finish it. And I think that's sort of disappointing.
The first big major Darkseid show that we did, Apocalypse Now Parts 1 and 2, it wasn't until we started making that show that we realized, wow, this is the first time we'd ever had the entire world in peril in our series.
Welcome to Apocalypse, Mr. Mannheim. You may call me Darkseid.
After a season and a half or so of Superman, we realized we really needed to up the ante as far as the stories go.
I really wanted to bring in Darkseid as a threat to Superman, but also with the idea of showing that this is a guy that Superman could become.
Everything was opened up. Anything could happen. You know, the world was truly in peril.
Darkseid would really push Superman to the limits and push Superman beyond his own code. And what happens when Superman goes there?
We were like, wow, yes. Now he can do something with somebody. Now he can go toe-to-toe with the villain.
By bringing Darkseid in, we were able to tell more cosmic stories, something that would affect the entire world.
The idea that Superman, a character with science fiction roots, created by avid science fiction fans in the 30s and a character from another world, that he should ultimately face off against a cast of villains who hailed from another world, who represented some kind of outside threat. I think that was a natural fit.
The great thing that's really different about Darkseid as opposed to all the other DC supervillains that we've been using up to that point is that he's an evil god.
The challenge for adapting the Fourth World characters for animation was what to leave in and what to leave out.
The Fourth World characters were introduced sort of slowly in the Superman series. We did a whole series with Intergang where there was a sense that there was some higher power going on behind this.
And so you had this sense that you were looking at the very iceberg's tip of some massive evil.
To introduce that world, I mean, it's such a big, heavy world that you sort of take steps getting into it before you finally pull the curtain and say, this is it.
Initially going into Apocalypse, that was the biggest story we had ever done at that point. And in fact, I remember us not being sure if we could pull it off. That this has got too much scale. It's impossible to do all the models we had to do for the animation, the backgrounds, the color. It was just a huge endeavor at that time.
We basically just gave it to the audiences in a big block of exposition. You know, I mean, it was literally, you know, it's like, okay, stop. Here's a movie that tells you everything you need to know about the Fourth World backstory. But I think we at least did it in a visually kind of interesting way, and it does have this kind of weird biblical epic feel to it, and the music's gorgeous, and we got Barbara Parkins to narrate it as the Mother Box.
One is called New Genesis, unparalleled in its beauty. It is ruled by the wise and powerful High Father.
When you deal with Darkseid, you get to deal maybe with Granny Goodness or Calabac or Kanto or any of those characters, and it helps to know that there's a almost godlike Darkseid behind the scenes supplying some unity and some cohesion to the story. But the fact is, you don't have to go up against the big gray guy every time out.
One of Kirby's gifts was coming up with really, really off-the-wall concepts for characters. And the stuff, when you say the names out loud, you think, oh, that's a joke.
I loved working with Granny Goodness. First of all, we had Ed Asner doing the voice, which just cracked me up. And yet somehow it made sense.
You naughty little monkey! Granny will spank you good!
Bruce Timm is a great fan of Jack Kirby, and I think wanted to do Turpin of Kirby.
I guess Bruce had the idea of saying, let's make it a lot like Jack, give him that sort of legendary Kirby feistiness.
Because Jack himself is very much that kind of character, kind of old school, tough guy, and with a heart of gold.
He's this wonderfully unpretentious character who, when the new gods arrive in his town and start messing everything up, says, well, I'll just arrest them.
Won't those Intergang bums ever learn Turpin's first law? You play in my backyard, you play by my rules.
Unlike the other villains in the Superman series who, wanted to defeat Superman, they wanted to, kill him or drag him down or whatever it was, Darkseid wanted to destroy his soul.
How do you show the audience that a character is really, really bad? I mean, you have to see him do something pretty terrible.
At the end of Apocalypse Now, Superman has routed him, and the new gods come as the cavalry to, banish Darkseid, back to his home planet and leave Earth alone. And, as he's leaving, he turns around and just out of spite, just out of pure spite, he kills Turpin in front of Superman.
Savor your moment of triumph, Superman. But remember, victory has its price.
Killing Turpin didn't further Darkseid's goals at all. He had already lost. It wasn't like it was going to do anything, but it was just a way to hurt Superman.
We see that great scene where Superman loses it, in rage, destroys, Darkseid's, battle tank destroyer thing, and it's something that you never saw Superman lose control like that before.
The funeral scene afterwards was really interesting because it allowed us to sort of pay tribute to Kirby and all of his creations. By having a lot of those creations actually there at the funeral paying tribute to him. And so it was very, very moving for us, who Kirby meant so much to us, to be able to sort of pay him back in this way.
The idea of killing someone suddenly raises the stakes for the entire series because it says, look, this can happen. If it can happen to a regular, it can happen to anyone. And suddenly the kids, or your audience gets a little bit more nervous. They take the jeopardy more seriously.
Goodbye, old friend.
I would not go as far to say that the funeral for Turpin represented symbolically our memorial for Kirby. I don't think that entered the picture. It really was just to play out the emotional moment.
Every time Superman wins a battle with Darkseid, he always somehow loses as well.
Onward!
He's the one villain who somehow manages to push Superman's buttons more than anybody else, even more so than his own arch nemesis Lex Luthor.
Darkseid leads the fighting to his underlings. He's incredibly powerful, incredibly strong, but he does not want to do it himself. The real power comes in making people sacrifice their lives for him.
Darkseid was such an absolute villain that he needed to be behind the scenes as often as he was out there in front of the cameras.
I wanted to put him in the position where he and Superman had to fight, where it was just a battle to the end. When it really comes down to it, you know, no more dancing around, no more pussyfooting, balls to the wall, you know, just smashing each other, silly. Who's going to win the fight?
That's for Dan Turpin.
Who? Superman wins the fight, physically. Takes Darkseid, takes his ruined body, throws it into the street, frees the people of Apokolips, and they don't go. Because at that point, Superman realizes he's lost. He's fought on Darkseid's terms. He's become a brawler. He's mixed it up one-on-one with him. He's broken the bonds of slavery, and the people of Apokolips are so beaten that they just pick up Darkseid and they take him back in because to them he is their god.
I am many things, Kal-El, but here I am God.
I think the Fourth World raised the stakes a lot. I think that it deepened the stories because it brought in those familial relationships that really weren't there before.
There'd been a bunch of two-bit crooks and sort of tin aliens from the 50s and things like that. And suddenly it became part of this large tapestry, this epic story that could be spun out in all sorts of different directions.
He wasn't just trying to tell kid stories. I mean, he was trying to play off of much bigger themes and talk about much bigger ideas.
Mass media as we know it today would be a completely different landscape if there had never been a Jack Kirby.
When I look at Darkseid and what that character did for Kirby and what that character brought to comic books, the first thing I notice is that cosmic evil.
Darkseid is a world beater. He is somebody who deals at a cosmic scale.
Anytime Darkseid came up or was introduced into a comic book, it instantly upped the ante for everything that was happening, and nothing was ever going to be the same.
Hi, I'm David Kaufman, voice of Jimmy Olsen in Superman the Animated Series. And we're here to catch up with some of the writers and creators from the show, hang out, ask them a few questions, find out what was going on in their mind as they were working on the show. I have a couple questions myself about Jimmy. Let's find out. Follow me. Hey guys!
Hey David.
How's it going?
Hey, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
How's it going, David? Very, very good. Long time no see.
Yeah,
Couple of
too
years
long.
since
Been a
we
while.
did the show.
Yeah.
I was told you hang out here.
Every Wednesday.
Yeah?
This is our place.
Really?
New comic day. We're here.
Seriously, very cool. Say hi to everybody. Introduce yourself.
Glenn Murakami.
Bruce Timm.
Paul Dini.
Alan Burnett.
Let me ask you some questions about the show in terms of these final 18 episodes tended to start the inclusion of Jack Kirby's Fourth World characters.
Right.
What was your thoughts behind bringing those characters in the show?
Well, for a number of things. Superman is such a powerful character. We have always had a problem finding powerful villains to throw up against him. So Jack Kirby's Darkseid character is like one of the major heavy hitters of the DC universe, and we're all like big Jack Kirby fans anyways, and look for any opportunity to, use his stuff in animation. Also, when the Fourth World was first introduced into the comics, one of the first books that it was introduced in was Jimmy Olsen comics. And so there was a Superman connection there already. So we weren't just like drafting, the Fourth World into the Superman mythos, just willy-nilly. I mean, there was a precedent for it.
Let us begin at the beginning. What once was whole was split asunder, and in its place there arose two worlds. Worlds as different as daylight and darkness.
It's just a real rich comic book mythology. I mean, it's like a whole big, super involved backstory, which we simplified, of course, for animation. But there's just a lot of really rich story material there.
Not every hero starts off with a great cast of villains, and Supermans are kind of, they're okay, but when you bring in a character like Darkseid and the whole planet of Apocalypse, you've got all these great characters who can match him power for power, and also the idea that Darkseid is a dictator and Superman represents, freedom. You can't beat that.
Did you find more limitation in terms of it being animation as opposed to a comic book, or did you find that gave you a whole new world that you could go into?
Well, like I said, the thing about the Fourth World stuff is that it's really pretty involved. I mean, originally in the comics it was like 4 different separate interlocking comics, and even then it was still just this big sprawling epic, and so we kind of had to really condense it down to its bare essentials to be able to shoehorn it into the Superman story. It wasn't limiting so much as just that it was tricky just trying to figure out how to condense it down and have it still make sense and still kind of retain what it was in the comics that made it good. Mm-hmm. So it was tricky.
Especially dealing with one episode per se at a time.
Yeah, right.
That's short of a time period to work with.
Yeah, they were big epic stories, so usually we would save the Apocalypse stuff until we had a 2-parter.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
We used Apocalypse about how many episodes?
Well, we had 2 episodes where we kind of hinted at it first.
Right.
We had the one with Tools of the Trade, where we just kind of, introduced a little bit of it. And then Father's Day was when Calabat came in and basically just fought Superman for 20 minutes. And then we did Apocalypse Now, Little Girl Lost, and Legacy. And all of those were 2-parters.
So about 8.
Yeah.
You're a magnificent opponent, Superman. But even you must realize it's hopeless.
Did you guys feel that there was like a difference in the show, like with the direction of the show when those characters were involved?
Clearly. I think the show started getting a little bit darker. Glenn gives me a hard time about that.
It's the stuff that we were the most into, that we felt the most connection to. I think we also felt the Kirby stuff, we can put our stamp on the show, that things that no one else had ever seen in like a Superman cartoon before. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what we really liked about it.
Right. But the stories did get a little bit more, not necessarily darker, but deeper. I mean, especially after Apocalypse Now, what Superman goes through in Apocalypse Now is kind of such a horrendous thing, and from that point on, at the end of that story, Darkseid is like way up at the top of Superman's hate list. So from that point on, every time Superman ran across Darkseid or his minions, Superman like instantly gets grouchy. I mean, it's always like it's a bad day for Superman when Darkseid and gang show up. So it's interesting to us because Superman is one of those characters. It's like you don't necessarily want to play him dark or gritty and angry and all the time, but he is kind of so inherently good that you need to kind of break that mold a little bit every now and then so that he's not just namby-pamby. You have to kind of, you got to kind of test him a little bit. So Darkseid was really good for that. The last episode of Superman was actually the second part of a 2-part Darkseid story. I mean, it's actually a pivotal moment for our Superman and Lois. I mean, they kiss for the first time in that show. And so that's kind of a turning point for them. Too bad it was the last episode, But
the intention was to make Superman distrusted now.
Right.
In those last 2 episodes, because Darkseid took him over and there was he was doing things that he wouldn't have done had he not been under Darkseid's control. So,
but yeah, that whole last season of Superman was going to be a little bit more about the world learning to trust Superman again, and Superman trying to regain their trust. And
there were other DC characters that came in these last few episodes too. How did that come about?
I don't know. I think it was those guys.
Well, Superman seems to lend himself more for guest stars than Batman did. We did relatively few guest stars on Batman. Superman is so much more powerful than Batman. You kind of want to throw other heroes in there with him and raise the stakes a little bit. Aquaman is kind of a natural. Green Lantern, they all fit. They dovetail into Superman's world, which is a much more superpowered world, whereas Batman is much more of a gritty film noir type of world. The villains there are more out of diseased minds than they are out of superpowers than anything. So the guest stars just seem a little bit more natural in Superman's world.
I don't believe it. A super girl?
Believe it.
What about the introduction of Supergirl?
Supergirl is something that we wanted to do from very early on. I know Glenn and I were really keen on doing Supergirl, and she's a big part of the mythos anyways, from the comics and stuff, so we figured we'd have to get around to her eventually someday, and kind of always liked the character, and we kind of wanted to put our own spin on her. And
it's just a contrast, and then having Superman having to deal with like a
it was definitely
a cute, bratty kind of girl.
Yeah. It was definitely something you guys wanted to do, as opposed to like...
Oh yeah, the network didn't come to us and say, yeah, you have to put in a girl for girl viewers or whatever. No, it was something we wanted to do, so...
There was just only one restriction, I think, was that she couldn't come from Krypton.
They were going through a phase where they're saying the last son of Krypton, last Kryptonian.
So he's the last one.
Yeah, we created a sister planet called Argo, which some way referenced Argo City, which is where she was from on Krypton originally. So it was like a sister planet where I guess the Kryptonians had colonized, hundreds or thousands of years before. Right. So they were very similar to the Kryptonians. Yet when Krypton blew up, their world was thrown out of orbit. And
we actually kind of skated some of that stuff by. If you remember, DC actually specifically requested that her powers not be exactly like Superman's.
Right.
They said because she's technically not Kryptonian, so Earth's sunlight should affect her differently. And we said, oh yeah, we'll give her some different powers. And
we never did. I mean, a line here or there, maybe kryptonite doesn't affect her as quickly as it affects Superman, or she's not as strong. But, that was sort of lost to time.
How about the any specific episodes that you can?
One of the episodes I like on this reel is Nighttime, which is the one where Superman assumes Batman's identity, and because Batman's missing, and so he's working with Robin to try and track him down. The city of Gotham's going a little wild because everybody thinks Batman's gone, and so he reappears as Batman and pretends to be Batman. Bob Goodman wrote that, and there's a lot of humor in it. There's one great scene where he beats up Bane, and you just love that scene. I love that scene.
I like seeing Superman doing his impression of Batman. I mean, when he's like talking to Commissioner Gordon, and he's like standing, ramrod stiff with his chin in the air and being all aloof, and that's a good episode. I like that one a
lot. Demon Reborn was another one.
Demon Reborn is another one of our Superman Batman team up episodes, which we did rather a number of, I suppose, once we brought Batman back. Yeah, that's the one where Ra's al Ghul is like getting really, really old, and his Lazarus Pit thing isn't working anymore, so he wants to steal Superman's power to rejuvenate himself.
Nice looking.
Any other episodes you can remember from this batch that you were particularly proud of?
I like Absolute Power. The artist did a great job on it. They created a whole new world.
It was one of those shows that I didn't like the script very much, but the only way I thought could make it appealing to me was just to go crazy with the sci-fi elements, and yeah, we designed Paul Ravoche went crazy designing the world, and I designed all the spaceships. We had good storyboard guys. We had Lee Weeks, the famous comic book artist, doing storyboards from that episode.
I know we did it really fast.
I was impressed with the world.
We did it really fast.
Good. Yeah. And the black hole effect. Oh yeah, that's right, the black hole effect. That's right. I think that's the reason you wanted to do that story in the first place. You said, I want this big black hole. And I said, Alan, do you know how difficult it is to do a black hole in animation? And this is before we had digital effects too. This was like, we had to do it all old school. But yeah.
Production-wise, we were cranking.
Yeah. I mean, we must have been doing Batmans at that same time too.
Yeah.
We were.
Yeah.
This set also has, unfortunately, some of the worst episodes we've ever done.
Such as?
Well, hate to say it, Superman's Pal. It's not a good show, unfortunately, I don't think. I think it's a good idea for a show, but the execution is just not there. It's like, I don't know.
Whose execution? Whose execution?
Oh, you were perfect.
No, you were fine. It's not your fault. It's just, no, we fell down. I had to say
well,
it.
you know
Somebody
what?
Had to say
but there are people who are probably wondering about that episode. What were they thinking about this one? And
It's
I think
somebody's
it's good
favorite
to.
episode.
Probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, there's an episode on here that a lot of people also consider one of our worst episodes, Unity. And I always kind of liked it.
I like that. That's a lot
I
of
always
fun.
kind of liked Unity,
Yeah.
but people just hate that episode.
Why?
Because it's really weird and grotesque.
one's
and
that? Supergirl
That's the
solo
one with the
episode.
creepy preacher guy, but he's actually an alien, and he's in Smallville, and he's got like a hive mind colony thing happening with all the people in Smallville, and they like vomit these big alien tentacles and
Oh,
stuff.
it's gross, but it's fun.
What are you gonna do?
Settle it. Once and for all.
As you look back, did you guys find that you accomplished what you set out to do at the beginning of the series?
We kind of touched a lot of the different bases in the Superman mythos. I mean, we got to do all the, the major things. We got to do Bizarro and Mixes Pitlick and, Supergirl and Superman's pal, the origin story. And it was kind of, we kind of were able to like pay homages to all our favorite versions of Superman, from the Fleischers and, the Christopher Reeve movies and whatnot. I mean, this stuff all blends together a lot better than I ever thought it did. But, even shows that I didn't think were all that great when we worked on them, I watch them now and go, wow, this is a really good episode.
So if you guys had the chance, would you like to take another crack at doing the show again? Not necessarily redoing it, but doing it again?
I'd love to take another shot at Superman.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be a lot of fun.
It's like Batman. Once we did it the second time, I think we figured out how to do it better. I think the same thing with Superman. We kind of worked all the bugs out.
I think, not only did we figure out a little bit more who Superman and Clark were, but also some of the interpersonal dynamics between Jimmy and Lois and Perry and the Kents, and you can go back and revisit that stuff and broaden those characters a little more once you've established them and use those for potential, story material. Same with the villains, too. You go in and you tweak them and you work with them a little bit, or you bring in some new characters, perhaps from the comics, and shake things up, and then you find yourself having fun with it.
A lot of Superman's success depends on how well he's animated, to me. To see the musculature and see the sense of flight with the cape and everything, I mean, he really depends on that. We were lucky in a lot of cases to get really good results.
Yeah, there's some that are like right up there with our best work.
That's really good stuff.
It's fun seeing, what does the world think of this guy? Here's one guy who is kind of like a god on earth, and how does the world relate to him? What does he do, and how does he make life better for people, and what's their perception of him? And I think when you do the stories that are just Superman and the world, you have a chance to really sit and think about what that means and go off on who the character is and how he relates to people. It's kind of fun.
Anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you'd want to say about the show?
More shows with Jimmy in it, I guess.
More shows with Jimmy,
yeah. One word.
Spinoff.
Oh, yeah. Super Olsen.
Super Olsen.
What do you think?
Well, that would be one thing if we ever went back and did a Superman show, new batches of Superman. That would be something we should definitely look into, is giving Jimmy superpowers.
Keep it.
Clearly.
Yep.
Good.
Missed a big boat there.
Elastalad needs to be done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glenn, Bruce, Paul, Alan. I had a great time. I learned some things. I'll see you around.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Don't be a stranger.
I won't. I'll be waiting by the phone.
Okay.
Tomorrow.
The Adventures of Jimmy.
So just
Elastalad.
There you go.
I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Warner Home Video's Superman the Animated Series Volume 3. Hope you had a good time. I did. And hope you had a little insight to what made Superman tick. I got some comics to read. Bye.
I think a hero is someone who is brave and selfless and helps other people. Superman is the definition of a hero.
Superman can solve big problems, do these world-stopping feats. Really, where his power is as an inspiration.
if you think about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, here were two young guys who were children of immigrant families writing about the experience of being the outsider, the underdog. This wish fulfillment that the underdog could be accepted, be a protector and be a hero, and be embraced by the land that as an outsider he's come to.
The ability to see through things, keep vision, all these things that would just be the coolest to have. But on top of that, he's a good guy.
He was the ultimate power fantasy. Kids coming out of the Great Depression literally had like no power, and for a dime they could read stories about this guy who had all the powers.
I was about 14 and I heard a kid scream down the block, and I ran to help him. He had fallen off his bike. I picked him up and ran him home. He was in my arms, and I could feel the wind as I was carrying him, and I could almost hear the George Reeves Superman theme music running in the back of my head. It's no better feeling than feeling like you're Superman. The only thing better than that is when you're feeling like Superman to somebody else.
My first memory of the character is seeing a grainy, scratchy, black and white image of Superman. Clearly it was the old George Reeves Superman show from the 50s. Now it's probably 4. I don't know who that guy is. It's a guy flying around and it looks cool.
I remember how thrilling the introduction was. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman.
I lived very close to the Griffith Observatory. Why do I know the image of the Griffith Observatory? And it was because of the black and white Superman series.
Ah, Professor. Superman!
I stopped watching it, though, after Superman and the Mole Men, because that just freaked me right out. Only Superman can fix it.
He really didn't make that much impression, but I'll tell you who did, and that was Superboy. I remember as a kid seeing a Superboy comic with a really kind of disturbing cover. He was blind, and Crypto, the super dog, was his guide dog.
It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
When I was 15, I discovered the Fleischer Superman cartoons, and that made a tremendous impression on me.
The best version of conveying confidence is letting the other person know that they're in good hands. That's what George Reeves' Superman conveyed.
Now, all right, take it easy.
He made you feel good because just being there, he let you know that you were taken care of.
Me and some of the other creative people on the show would kind of, spitball ideas. So, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do after Batman's done? And of course, inevitably, you think, oh, well, there's Superman. I wasn't all too keen on the idea because A, it seemed really obvious, and B, I knew exactly from the minute, Gene McCurdy first said to me, Batman cartoon, I knew kind of like instantly what I wanted to do. Whereas with Superman, as much as I liked the character, I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do with him to make an animated series out of it.
Warner Brothers Animation at this time, the 90s and early 2000s, in kids' TV animation, was an Emmy factory. All thanks to Gene McCurdy. They hired the best people they could get at the jobs and then let those people do their work.
After Batman was finished, Steven Spielberg watched the Batman show and he really liked it. He said, I want to make a show with those guys. One of the pitches we developed was Freakazoid. Came up with the original idea and the design for it. That was the one that Steven really, really liked. My original idea was that it was going to be an action-adventure show with lots of humor. It kept becoming more of a humor show with some superhero elements in it. I didn't have a feel for it. I didn't think I was going to be able to execute that show to what Steven wanted it to be. Around that same time, Gene McCurdy would say, Kids WB is, they're talking about doing a Superman show. Do you want to do a Superman show? And I went, yes.
You had this great team that had just done mind-blowing work with Batman, whose hands were ready to take on this new project.
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the character designs, learn the lessons of BTAS and apply them to this new show. And then for the background styling, we still kept it somewhat retro and somewhat Art Deco. It's not as dark and angular.
Batman's world was dark and gritty, kind of film noirish, and Superman's world is bright, it's optimistic. So it was doing something very familiar, but it was a completely different switch, and we all welcomed the change.
One of my own personal goals was to come up with a look of the show that was as distinctive as what we had done with Batman, but not exactly just the same look.
There'd been so many incarnations of Superman, and the idea of doing a new one was a very daunting experience for us.
And there were people kind of waiting for us to fail, saying Batman has this depth, this psychology, brooding cloud over him, and Superman just isn't as interesting a character. Would we be able to make a good series from Superman?
Initially, I did design the main cast. Brainiac was like the one villain that was even more period than BTAS.
It looked great, but we thought, well, that's not enough of a visual break from Batman's world.
A lot of back and forth, a lot of different stylistic things we tried. I got really stuck early on. It's like, I went back and looked at the original comics and I fell in love with the Joe Shuster style. So I did spend some time actually trying to bring the Shuster kind of stylistics to our animation style. The problem was that was also what the Fleischers had used for their big inspiration. That's where the bar is set when you're doing animated Superman. It's like, there's Fleischer Superman. It's like, that's the level that you're never going to hit. I knew early on that we weren't going to be able to use that as our goal. So whatever we came up with had to be unique on its own.
But even you must realize it's hopeless.
One of the great assets we had was in the tremendous creations of Jack Kirby. He was the defining creator of superheroes throughout most of the 20th century.
Jack Kirby is obviously one of my artistic idols. You can tell by looking at almost all of my shows and in my comics work as well. He did have a very specific design approach to science fiction type stuff.
And when the time comes, you and this primitive planet will swear allegiance to Darkseid.
So we thought that would be kind of a neat way of spicing up the show, would be to bring in Darkseid and Fourth World characters. Once we brought Darkseid on screen as one of our main bad guys for the series, then of course all of the Kirby stuff just went off the charts.
Welcome to Krypton.
Inside Brainiac, there's Kirby Crackle, which represents his quote-unquote face when he's just the AI before he has a human body. Broadcast standards and practices, the network censors are always very sensitive to gunplay in children's programming. On the old Batman show, anytime we had one of the bad guys pull out a gun and start firing, blasting away. But in a lot of classic Jack Kirby comics, policemen had a tendency to not just wear 38s in their holsters. They had like these kind of stylized weapons.
Not a fact. Well, get ready to shoot.
It brought something a little bit new and a little bit fresh to our look. We spent a lot of time designing what Krypton looked like. We did stick to a slight Art Deco styling for the background designs. There's a whole other kind of sidebar branch of Art Deco that I ended up calling it Ocean Liner Deco. Because there's a lot of ocean liner posters back in the 1920s and 30s that had this kind of really stylized, kind of rounded shapes with straight edges.
I liked having all the different levels of roadways and things for Superman to fly past.
A color palette that still had weight to it, authenticity to it, so that the show didn't look like a kid's cartoon, which I think is what people were worried that we were going to do.
Vehicles. Didn't want to go back and do B-test style, so what can I do? What's different? So we came up with a bunch of different designs for Clark's car. We went a little bit futuristic with the vehicle designs. We knew for sure Lois was going to need a car to zip around town. It's not, Jetsons futuristic, but it's slightly futuristic. It's actually a pretty neat little car. We did give Superman a spaceship. Pa Kent had it out in his barn. It survived the trip to Earth, and Superman fixed it up and used it to fly into outer space anytime he had to go out into outer space and have adventures.
Superman to Star Labs. Can you read me?
And to make that seem logical, also he's going to need a space suit.
Bruce never rested. He would keep tweaking them and respond to fans and respond to his own artistic sensibility. There were very subtle things that happened as the show went on.
What's something new that we can do with this show? It's all been done.
Artists.
So we had to think bigger to come up with big challenges for Superman, while at the same time making him a little less powerful than he had been in other incarnations.
What is that?
Taking a cue from the Fleischers. If you see him struggle, you pull for him, and he's more believable.
When I lost my balance and fell, suddenly this big blue angel with red wings came down and caught me.
We did want this to stimulate thought and what would happen if there were these superheroes in our lives, how would we deal with them if they showed up now?
I remember thinking about the decades of work that had been done before, and I could only imagine the thousands of writers in Superman up until that point, and the honor of getting to contribute to this body of work.
Yeah, Lane.
We could really get into Lois Lane as a character. Clark as not just a one-beat reporter, but as a man who's made some choices in his life to live a certain way and help mankind. And there's a chance to broaden his world a little bit by bringing in Jonathan and Martha Kent to develop his relationship with his cousin Kara, who becomes Supergirl.
You'd be surprised at what I can do.
It really was a great chance to add a lot to his mythology and have a lot of fun with those characters.
Hi, guy!
I tended to get stories that dealt with more humorous situations with Superman, with contrasts. Lobo and Mixie, something where Superman is completely, almost powerless, but has to sort of outwit them and deal with it on a different level.
Ah, nuts.
Those were kind of fun episodes.
My card.
The idea that he came from another planet was there, and that he, worked as a reporter was there.
Kent! My office, now!
But all the other things that we look back as being so important to the Superman canon were added piecemeal over the years and in wildly different mediums.
I took it on as part of my job just to educate myself and read every story that had been written about Superman. Part of what was really exciting here was to get to do our takes on these characters.
Playtime is over.
Superman, in many incarnations over the years, was kind of corny. Christopher Reeve, Clark Kent, gosh golly, klutzy was what I think a lot of people were expecting. And the guys were real clear that we weren't going to do that.
Andrea found some great regular characters in Tim Daly and Dana Delaney as Clark and Lois, Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor.
Andrea and Bruce, they knew the characters so well that it really helped me get to know the character well.
Somehow we've got to even the odds. That's all right. We only need one.
Let's go 38. I always favored ensemble record for every single show that I ever did. Always better to have actors react off of each other, and when they could hear the other actors and the voices that they had created, it was much easier for them to create a voice that fit into that world.
We had brought Clancy Brown in for auditions for Superman. I'd always liked Clancy in the movies.
I went in with my best Superman voice. based on what I had seen from George Reeves.
He's like, Clancy, do you want to audition for Luthor while you're here?
For Christ's sake, now why do I always have to play the bad guy? I basically did a little bit of a slower version of my Superman impression as Lex Luthor.
That's right. Make him come to you.
Dana Delaney came in and I slated her. This is Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, take 1. It was completely silent. She didn't speak. And I said, Dana, you okay? And she said, I had to just take a second because I can't tell you how long I have waited to hear those words. She had wanted to play Lois Lane forever. We had these half-wall baffles. They separate the actors and they separate the sound. But you could stand up and see the actor sitting next to you. And so often, actors who had not done this work before would be seated next to somebody with a lot of experience and lots of talent. And they would literally stand up with their mouth open and just watch that experienced actor work and be so impressed. And that was always delightful to see.
I'm gonna personally lead the army that vaporizes you too.
Dana as Lois, very smart.
What about the story?
Driven.
Hey, I'm not finished.
But also very funny. I think there was more of a variance with the Superman characters.
I wasn't sure you'd really come.
She is smitten with Superman. This is something she's never seen before, and she's a woman of the world. She's a reporter that's been around.
Aren't we getting a little personal?
Better now than never.
Having a selfless person like Superman needs a foil that is really challenging for him. Lex is a megalomaniac, narcissist.
A grateful president bestows heartfelt thanks on Metropolis's favorite son, Superman.
The fact that he's not as adored as Superman gets under his skin. It's one of his flaws.
There was always a great undercurrent of menace to him, where even if he's pleasant, he can turn on a dime and tinge everything with a dark threat.
You leave me and my operations alone, and I and my little green rock will leave you alone.
When we were all in the room together, you got a sense of the characters that people were creating. That's where the drama is. The contrast between this heroic, good-looking guy and all the twisted, damaged characters that surrounded him. I can't name all the actors. There's so many of them, but they were fantastic.
We had been playing with the psychological aspects of the villains on Batman and felt no reason to change on Superman.
I'm not some infernal machine. I'm human. I need food and rest.
We needed to make the villains relatable.
Most of Superman's villains were kind of older, heavyweight businessmen. There's just a bunch of guys in suits.
The villains in Superman are more about the external power that they wield. We still found new psychological, emotional origins for the characters.
Leave me alone.
I'm ready for that rematch.
Why did they go so crazy? What is it that's making Superman be the point of their contempt?
Toyman was another character who was kind of just a boring old guy in a suit in the comics. There's a guy that Glenn and Dan and I met at San Diego Comic-Con. He carries a dummy with him, and the dummy's name was George.
The Toyman was a tragic one whose childhood had been ruined by ugly Mannheim.
The bad man watched and laughed while the police locked the kindly toy maker in the dungeon. The poor little boy was bounced from foster home to foster home like a little toy that nobody wanted.
Ultimately, he's sympathetic. There's no room for sympathy because he's so scary.
Ah! You broke my toy! You spoiled my fun!
Parasite seemed to me that he should start out as a character that was angry about being powerless. That's what drove him to become the villain that he became.
When I touch somebody, I get strong. I absorb their energy.
And that's really indicative of the kind of focus that Alan and Paul made sure we infused in all of our villains. Our villains were human beings first, for the most part, who were changed by technology or circumstance and became this villain.
Take a wrong step, Mr. Kent? What?
Bizarro was actually the most tragic of our characters, I think, for me. He was always kind of a buffoon and a clown in the comics.
The makeup's rubbing off.
Being a flawed clone, he actually thinks he is Superman initially.
He looked like me. I no understand.
Now he had this sad background, this pathos that wasn't quite there in the beginning.
What am me?
Bizarro was really fun for me to play because he doesn't know that he's participating in something that's so damaging. He is certainly damaged.
Me? No, I'm Superman.
So well performed by Tim Daly.
Save Lois.
It's the only way to save your life.
Metallo lost his humanity when he made a deal with Lex.
I can't taste anymore. I can't smell. You don't know how this feels. It's driving me crazy.
Well, well. Alien in my own backyard.
And even Lex, with all of his genius, could have used his powers for good, but became so obsessed with power.
I control everything in this town, Superman. Your cooperation is not really necessary.
The writers found ways to let us human beings identify with the villains and the heroes of this superhuman universe.
So what say you, Brainiac?
One can appreciate Jor-El's hard work. However, he is still mistaken.
Alan Burnett came up with the idea that Brainiac comes from Krypton, just like Superman does.
Fewer beings who have the knowledge, the more precious it becomes.
Brainiac is basically a sentient computer and knows that the planet is doomed and abandons Krypton.
You're transmitting your memory to a satellite. You're saving yourself.
That proved that Brainiac was a self-serving character. He shows up later in a humanoid form that he's made for himself. He becomes even more of a threat for Kal-El.
There's always something that people will recognize in themselves, a flaw or even a virtue that can be exploited in all of the villains of Superman.
He's coming.
Who is?
Darkseid.
Darkseid is a lot like Lex Luthor in that he looks at Superman as something he can't control. Logically, he must destroy him.
An episode called Tools of the Trade. That was our first hint of the fourth world to people who'd never read a comic book in their life.
I mean, as they say in the comics, Darkseid is.
You may call me Darkseid.
He wants to utilize whatever Superman's got to accentuate his own power.
There arose two worlds. Worlds as different as daylight and darkness.
Darkseid really came into his own in a two-part episode called Apocalypse Now. Doing a giant widescreen adventure story on a TV budget and schedule, we did not have much experience with at the time.
Holy Hannah!
Darkseid comes to Earth and he's going to create burn holes in the Earth and turn Earth into a sister planet of his planet Apocalypse. This was literally a planetary invasion. There's a great scene in Apocalypse Now. It's in part 2. It's inspired by a scene in the Bible. Lucifer's on top of this mountaintop with Jesus and he says, hey, everything down there, all of that can be yours. I was always struck by that scene. I said, well, let's put that in the show.
The power you have now, it's nothing compared with what I'm offering you.
You know I can't do that.
Pity.
Since Kirby created him, the character kind of stuck around and became ultimately one of the biggest and baddest and most important villains in the DC universe.
If you won't be my knight, you will be my pawn.
When it came time to cast him, Ironside's name came up and he came in and he was just awesome.
Savor your moment of triumph, Superman. But remember, victory has its price.
When we first started on the show was when we heard that Jack Kirby had died, and as a crew we went to his funeral. When we came back, Bruce designed Dan Turpin to be Jack Kirby.
This is our world, Ugly. You won't get it without a fight.
When we had decided to zap Dan in Apocalypse Now Part 2, we dedicated the show to him.
Go on, you mangy buzzards, and don't come back.
And we gave Turpin Kirby's funeral.
In the end, the world didn't really need a Superman, just a brave one.
So that was a very meaningful moment for all of us.
I think that Superman the Animated Series, much like Batman, much like the original Animaniacs, much like a lot of the Warner Brothers shows at that time, just happened to be created at the right time. There were a lot of people who just found tremendous outlets for their creativity and their passion, and it brought a lot of people together.
After the George Reeves black and white TV series, there was, of course, the wonderful Christopher Reeve movies. And then there wasn't a lot of Superman activity until our series.
It was lightning in a bottle. Bruce insisted that we have an incredible team.
Because you bring such light and such positive feeling to an endeavor like that, it's really going to be something that endures.
Between Batman and Superman and the other shows that we did after, we did a couple of 100 episodes of shows that all fit within a persistent universe. We were never allowed to repeat ourselves. The bar was really high to keep bettering ourselves and keep learning new tricks.
The show had scale, scope, and we also introduced new characters to the Superman mythos that people had not seen before, with the infusion of the Kirby world. It was really amazing, and it did make a huge impression on people.
Let's finish it. Very well. This world dies.
Superman stepped into our consciousness and represented the best versions of what the alien arriving could mean. It was an assurance that the ultimate expression of power, science fiction, would be benevolent. Yet another thing Superman represents is the American fabric. Clark Kent was raised in Kansas and moved to the city. He was this fusion of the small town country morals with cosmopolitan sophistication, and in addition to everything else, Superman represented this idea that the best of America was in the fusion of the best of its parts.
I think he taps into some subconscious well of the human experience. It is important not only to Americans, but to everyone around the world.
Do I have a deal for you?
There was a crossover episode with Batman. Lex and the Joker teamed up.
I'm listening.
And I remember Mark and being starstruck.
See? Solid kryptonite.
Because he was Luke, but and he was also a tremendous Joker. And then he walks in the room and he's just the most adorable, cuddly guy you ever want to meet. And even though I was starstruck initially, I just fell in love.
I love you too.
Remember who you are and the legacy you carry inside you.
Superman is born of a sort of purity, a
purity of spirit, a kindness. Kids, especially at an early age, really respond to that. He is just an amazingly accessible character to them.
You actually care about them geeks.
They're human beings.
They call him the Boy Scout because he will always do the right thing. Batman, however, is completely human and can make all kinds of mistakes, and does in his life.
There's a condition on your staying here. You can't ever use your powers to hurt people.
What Superman represents to me is absolute truth, honesty, honor, all the things that we are searching for in our leaders today.
Are you all right?
I'm fine. Gotta go.
The dream of flying, helping other people is something that is intoxicating. And there's nobody better in the world than Superman.
I like a Superman who can't just push the entire planet Earth out of the path of an asteroid.
My name is Orion.
Trying to keep all of the larger-than-life elements, the fantasy elements, but at the same time trying to update the characters and the villains and the supporting cast in a way that made them seem a little bit more modern and up-to-date. So that's kind of what we tried to do as well.
There's a man and a woman fighting!
We all want to believe that the future is bright. The best in people will come out.
That's one for the home team.
A protector will take care of us.
They're all yours.
We all want to believe that we can be that protector. The fantasy of being Superman will never grow old.